a catastrophic destruction of the missile, a large explosion, a crater can be observed. There have been many reports from media reports based on commercial satellite imagery that show the crater that was left by the explosion. I'm Steve Fetter. I'm a physicist and a professor of public policy at the University of Maryland. The Sarmat is a very large intercontinental ballistic missile. It's a replacement for what is currently the largest Russian ICBM. And it is designed to carry a large number of warheads, a very long distance, to basically threaten the United States with nuclear attack from a wide range of angles. The Sarmat is the largest ICBM, I think, that will ever be deployed by not only Russia, by any country. And it can be equipped with a very large payload, at least 10 nuclear weapons of high yield, and also has a range that allows it to attack either via the North Pole or the South Pole in what's called a fractional orbital configuration, so that it can avoid missile defenses. The missile was announced by President Putin in March of 2018, but it had been under development for quite some time. And when President Putin announced it, he touted its ability to evade missile defenses of the United States. The deployment of the Sarmat has been delayed considerably, and the reasons are not exactly clear. We know that there have been at least 2, perhaps as many as 4 failed tests and only 1 successful test. And this may be for 2 reasons. One is that the missile designers, the chief designers of liquid-fueled missiles in Russia were actually in Ukraine. In the former Soviet Union. So the missile that the Sarmat is replacing, the SS-18, that was designed and built in Ukraine. So this capability had to be transferred to Russia. And then after 2014, after the Russian invasion of Crimea and Ukraine in 2014, Ukraine ended its cooperation, its technical cooperation with Russia. So Russia has had to reestablish that on its own, and apparently has not been very successful. The other reason for the delay may be that Russia is pouring resources into the war with Ukraine, and may be diverting effort from maintaining and modernizing its nuclear forces. So all of this has contributed to the delay of the production and operational deployment of the Sarmat. Well, President Putin has, as you know, has made veiled and not so veiled threats to use nuclear weapons, mostly to deter the United States and NATO from more direct involvement in the war in Ukraine, and try to discourage, to the extent possible, U.S. and NATO support of Ukraine. While that has largely failed to deter us from supporting Ukraine with military equipment and with other aid, it has been effective in deterring our entry into the war in any way by any direct engagement with U.S. or NATO troops. And so I think Putin sees his nuclear weapons as being effective in that sense, in limiting the involvement of the United States and NATO, and inducing fear and caution, because, of course, we don't want the war to escalate into a nuclear war. That was one of the very first things that President Biden said was a U.S. goal, to prevent this from escalating into a third world war. On the other hand, I think President Putin has realized that those threats, those nuclear threats, are limited because they're inherently not very credible. There really would be no effective military uses for nuclear weapons in Ukraine. The use of one or a few nuclear weapons would not win the war or be decisive in any military way. And the threat to use nuclear weapons at a lower level, the level of conflict we're at today, is simply inherently not credible. I think Putin understands that any use of nuclear weapons would turn world opinion against him and against Russia, probably would end the assistance of countries like China and India, which Russia is increasingly relying on. So I think nuclear weapons play an important role in the conflict, but they're more in the background. I don't think the failure to deploy the Sarmat, or the delay, has really affected the Russian deterrent in any meaningful way, because Russia deploys a very large and diverse nuclear force. The missile that the Sarmat would replace, the SS-18, the so-called Satan, the Sarmat's also referred to as son of Satan because it's replacing a missile that had the NATO code word Satan. That missile is still deployed and is still, very much a potent nuclear deterrent. Russia also has other missiles, land-based missiles in silos, on mobile launchers. It has submarines at sea that are relatively invulnerable. It has nuclear-armed bombers and cruise missiles. So the Sarmat is just a component of the overall Russian nuclear deterrent. So Russia has a perfectly adequate, more than adequate, nuclear force without Sarmat to deter any adversary from contemplating a nuclear attack on Russia. It's true that one of the tests was a catastrophic destruction of the missile, a large explosion, a crater can be observed. There have been many reports from media reports based on commercial satellite imagery that show the crater that was left by the explosion. But exactly what the cause of the explosion was is not clear. Whether the missile exploded during the launch, or whether it was an aborted launch and the missile exploded in the silo afterward. Russia's released no information on that, so it's hard to tell what the cause of the failure was and how serious that setback is to the deployment of the missile. Western sanctions may have played a role in delaying the deployment of Sarmat, but again, without detailed technical information about the missile, it's hard to say. I mean, Russia is a large country with a lot of technical expertise, engineers. Of course, they led the development of long-range missiles for many years, so they have people who are expert, know what they're doing. And whether sanctions play a role in making it more difficult or delaying the deployment of the missile would really depend on details that are very difficult to know from the outside.